Ladies and gentlemen, it's my utmost pleasure to welcome you today on the second day of the EU Romani Week in Brussels in the European Parliament. We are meeting after 2 years of pandemic without any physical meetings, moving from the online to the personal, and we are meeting around a very important day, which is the 16th of May, Romani Resistance. For those who were already here yesterday or were watching online, so I also greet everyone who is watching online, we talk about a lot about the Romani heroes, about those who actually were leading the Romani uprising in the Auschwitz-Birkenau. And we also heard a lot about the struggle that we are still keeping today in fighting anti-Gypsyism in our daily lives. And we could actually met yesterday some of our young Roma friends and Romani heroes who actually are here to fight together with us. And today, we want to still continue the conversation. We want to bring very important topics. The first one, the first event of today, it's the decade to counter anti-Gypsyism as a new strategy for Roma inclusion in the EU and the Western Balkan. And we want to actually start our new initiative, the Decade, Countering Anti-Gypsyism. And we want to talk about it from different perspectives, from the perspective which is important in the EU, but also which is important in the Western Balkan and Turkey, but also from the different perspective from the views of different institutions. So my name is Gabriela Hrabaňová. I'm the director of the European Roma Grassroots Organization Network. I will walk you through the first panel, which actually will bring these different perspectives already. So we will have a view from the UN institution, from the European Parliament, but also from the European Commission. And I would, actually we have a little delay, so without any further ado, I would ask Bridget van Oet, regional representative for Europe and head of Brussels office of the UN Human Rights Office, here to share with us her perspective and her work and her sort of a vision on how to fight anti-Gypsyism from the UN institution. So Bridget, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Gabriela. Good morning, fellow panelists, dear participants, colleagues and friends. Thank you very much for inviting the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights here today. While preparing for today's event, I reflected on the discussions we had in this very same building now already 3 years ago, when we organized, together with some of you, the first discussion on truth and reconciliation for anti-Gypsyism. That was in 2019. It was unprecedented in many ways, not least because there had never been such a large gathering of Roma in the European Parliament. The personal testimonies of exclusion and abuse that we listened to were heartfelt, real, and gut-wrenching. It was clear for all to see how centuries of discrimination had totally eroded trust between Roma and non-Roma, and had very often undermined the self-esteem of Roma communities. Indeed, the Roma have suffered slavery, the Holocaust, forced sterilization, segregation, forced evictions, discriminatory policing, the denial of citizenship, the institutionalization of their children, hate crimes, and virtually all forms of discrimination in the books, with Roma women frequently condemned to multiple forms of discrimination. The historical injustices against the Roma have devastated communities. Still, little is known among the wider public about these dark chapters of our history. What we do know is that the situation of Roma women, men, and children is alarming, that the status quo is unacceptable, and that efforts made to date to remedy this situation have yielded only limited results. Many Roma, Sinti, and travelers remain condemned to a life at the margins of European society, deprived from basic services, discriminated in their access to quality education, employment and housing, denied genuine participation in projects affecting their communities, and invisible from public and political life and history books alike. Our office has called for vigorous anti-discrimination measures, justice for victims of discrimination, of which hate crimes are only one manifestation. And we've advocated with the EU and its member states to explicitly address conscious and unconscious bias against the Roma by the majority population. 3 years later, we see both progress and setbacks. On the one hand, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the inequalities and deep-rooted discrimination in Europe. On the other hand, we're seeing here 6 mayors from the Western Balkans who are to be recognized for the work that they are doing to improve and work with the Roma communities and improve the human rights situation. Also, and it may be a small win, but I still would like to mention it, the discussion on transitional justice for Roma that we started in Brussels 3 years ago is now being taken up at the global level, with our headquarters convening a meeting for Roma from around the world on this very same topic. More importantly, I would say that the biggest win is that the times where the burden of improving the human rights situation of Roma was placed primarily on the shoulders of the Roma themselves are over. The current EU Roma strategic framework differs very sharply from the previous one in that it no longer uses the term integration, but talks about inclusion, which suggests a two-way movement. It also adopts a human rights approach based on the principles of participation, transparency, and accountability. It calls for better coordination between the regional, national, and local levels, and it provides a robust indicator framework to measure quantitative and qualitative progress. But most of all, it commits to tackling anti-Gypsyism head-on. The inclusion of anti-Gypsyism in the EU Roma framework is what we call a sea change, and we have high hopes for the new Roma framework. But it will require constant vigilance and continued advocacy by national human rights institutions, equality bodies, civil society, international human rights mechanisms, regional organizations, and most of all the Roma communities themselves to ensure that Roma participation at national and local levels is taken seriously and to hold states to account for implementing the binding legal obligation of non-discrimination that states have contracted under international law. Indeed, the responsibility to guarantee the enjoyment of human rights by all Roma, Sinti, and travelers lies in first instance with the state, national and local government, parliament, and the judiciary. And we know from our presences across the Western Balkans that it is unlikely that states will achieve the sustainable development goals unless anti-Gypsyism is seriously addressed. Efforts to improve the human rights situation of Roma in Europe without tackling the discrimination against them by the majority population will fail to achieve the Sustainable Development Agenda. And as long as strategies for inclusion do not explicitly address prejudice, bias, and stereotypes against Roma, they are likely to produce only limited results. Last year, our UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, presented a racial justice agenda for transformative change. While it focused on the rights of Africans and people of African descent, the 4 actions laid out in the report can usefully inspire the efforts to tackle anti-Gypsyism. The first action proposed by the High Commissioner, we call it Step Up. The denial of racism remains the greatest obstacle to overcoming the problem. We need to stop denying anti-Gypsyism and start dismantling racism. This requires an official acknowledgement by authorities that racism is not only the problem of some rotten apples, but that it is deeply embedded in our structures, systems, and institutions. Education, both formal and informal, is a second component of this response. And another one is disaggregated data collection, of course, with strict safeguards and in accordance with international law. I would like to also mention very briefly the second call to action in the Racial Justice Report, and it's about justice. Impunity must end, whether we're talking about police violence, school segregation, hate crimes, or the deprivation of the right to water or housing. The full force of justice must be mobilized, and violators of human rights must be held to account. And I would like to say here that we have been helping countries around the world to adopt anti-discrimination legislation, but that laws are only words on a piece of paper unless they are properly implemented. So I would like to stop here and thank you and say that it's a great honor for me to be part of Romani Week and this event in particular. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Bridget, and thank you for coming here also as a big ally of the civil society and contributing to this fight against anti-Gypsyism and bringing the institution alignment. I think this is super important. I would like to, before I invite actually Petr Polák, I would ask you all to use your headsets for those who doesn't speak Romani, because the intervention from Petr Polák, who is the member of the European Parliament, he's coming from the group of European People's Party. He's also the vice chair of the ARDI intergroup. He will be speaking Romanes, and the Romani it's on the channel 2. Yes, so please, Petr, the floor, it's yours. Můžeš.
Näissä Gabina vaš tirolaf, pal keraftuke vaš kadaka isu kerja prekayatema kai angel kayatema pre adaji viseskro.
To thank you for calling me to speak on this topic, which is very important. They are friends, they are brothers, sisters, they are co-fighters against anti-Gypsyism and all that work on Roma inclusion. I would like to, I will talk, after the World War II ended, we were expecting that everyone would abandon discriminatory practices, and that after the trauma from the Holocaust, that everybody would stop with discriminating and excluding each other. Still we have the philosophy that some race is inferior, and it's sad to see it in these times. Unfortunately, Roma are experiencing this kind of philosophy for years. Still, Roma are facing brutality from police in many countries. I'm very engaged to work on this cause and to make intervention and investigations. From Europe, we have a not nice experience with police brutality, especially in countries like Slovakia, where the police was fighting Romani children, where there were forced police intervention against Roma in their villages, in their citizens. We have the experience of Czech Republic, where Stanislav Tomáš was killed by police. We should fight against policies that are causing further economic and social exclusion of Roma. It's fundamental to work on it, because we still have communities that live without a proper infrastructure and water. The last decade we had a lot of strategies and programs that were addressing Roma issues. But now we have a new ambition now we need to talk about what is happening with the Roma. We will now talk about the millions of funds that were spent, but the situation of Roma is not changed in the villages, in the cities. Roma families are still without job. They're living in worse condition than in an African country. Still, we have villages where Roma children are drinking water from the street, from the muds. We need to understand that Roma youth is potential for the new market, employment market. We need to understand that it's important to do a very important intervention to fight anti-Gypsyism and to help our Roma. I would like to thank you all for being here and to make you understand that it's important that we should fight against anti-Gypsyism and make sure that Roma children, Roma young people, the Roma are not facing these difficulties today. And we should join forces against it. So I would like to thank you and wish you all a nice day.
Thank you so much, Peter. I know he's have to leave, so thank you. We will continue with our panel. Petr is our great supporter. He's working around the cause since he entered the parliament, but also before. So thank you very much, and see you in another event.
See you.
So we get a great account of actually how the anti-Gypsyism is being it's happening around the European Union. With this, because we actually know that the anti-Gypsyism, it's not happening, it's practically happening everywhere where are the Roma. And we also would like to hear from our another distinguished guest, Michaela Matuela, who's acting director for the Western Balkan. She's coming from the Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement Negotiations of the European Commission, and she can bring us the perspective for the enlargement countries. So, Michaela, please, your floor is yours, and if you can keep it to 5 minutes, it would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. It's really a pleasure to be here today and to have such an event in physical presence, as we were discussing with some of the...
If I may be... And Bishu Panch Puro Romanes, yeah? 25 for Romani, for the translation.
So we were saying with some of the colleagues that it's really a pleasure to be able to meet in physical presence after such a long time, and the possibility of having all these exchanges during this week. Let me start by expressing my appreciation for the attention that this House has always given and continues to give to anti-discrimination policies, and notably to the inclusion of Roma people. This event today is testimony of how this House defends the rights of European citizens of its partner countries. But it also shows that despite all of the effort over the years, much still needs to be done. This continued focus is even more important today after the impact of the war on Ukraine, which is affecting vulnerable people and also coming after the effect of the COVID pandemic, which again already had a gigantic impact, in particular on vulnerable people. A lot has already been said by the previous distinguished speakers, so I will just add briefly the perspective from the European Commission. Anti-Gypsyism, racism against Roma, is one of the root causes of marginalization and social exclusion of this community. The European Fundamental Rights Agency found anti-Gypsyism to be a key structural driver of Roma exclusion. Equality, non-discrimination, and building anti-racist societies and democracies are part of those values which constitute the grounding of our union. Values which we stand for also when defining our relation with our partner countries, and the enlargement countries obviously have a special place in this. With the adoption of the 2020-2030 EU Roma Strategic Framework for Equality, Inclusion and Participation, fighting anti-gypsies is now a fully fledged policy of the EU. We have set a series of ambitious targets to be achieved by 2030, as you know, to fight against discrimination, improve the social and economic situation, and reinforce the participation of the Roma community. In the Western Balkans specifically, the goal of fighting discrimination was explicitly identified at the highest political level in the Poznan Declaration of 2019. The 2020-2021 Western Balkan Roma inclusion strategies aim to make the Poznan Declaration a reality by transposing the 2020-2030 EU Roma framework, including the anti-gypsyism dimension. On the side of the Commission, more concretely, we are supporting these strategic objectives, and we have stepped up also our financial assistance through specific projects targeting social inclusion of Roma. To date, our overall contribution for ongoing regional Roma project stands at 16 million euro. This is a tangible sign of the commitment and the commitment to implement the political declarations. We also have, together with the enlargement process, we have developed, in particular for the Western Balkans, the Economic and Investment Plan. The Economic Investment Plan is a tool through which we want to support and accompany the enlargement process through substantial investments, but not only in the infrastructures dimension, which is normally the most known part of the Economic Investment Plan, but through policies that also have a specific focus on social cohesion, and therefore, in this context, of course, inclusion of Roma people have an important place. Notwithstanding all the efforts that we have made, there is still, of course, a lot to be done. The EU has a very clear strategy, and the Commission is stepping up its efforts to contribute to all that needs to be done to support activities such as promoting positive narratives, combating negative stereotypes, raising awareness on Roma history and culture, and encouraging equality. All this with the aim of shaping a better society where everybody can reach their potential irrespective of their origins. I trust that thanks to all of the efforts, and most importantly, thanks to the determination and resilience of the community itself, we will see concrete improvements in the situation of the Roma community. Events like this and the others foreseen this week are certainly an important catalyzer for change. So I wish to all of us a very fruitful discussion for the rest of today's panels. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I think that it's very important that actually we go across the European institutions and all the and kind of having the investment not only on the Roma-specific strategies but also kind of mainstreaming the Roma issues. And thank you for giving us the outline of it. I would maybe slowly, actually the introduction it's getting over. I would slowly call the other panel to come here, but also. While my colleagues are standing up, which is Adriatic Hassantari, Maria Garcia Fidalgo, Maria Suleimanova, Dan Dogi, and Senada Sali. I would still like to thank to all the colleagues, first the panelists that came to the first panel, but also to all those others who are actually contributing to have this panel happen, which is the Roma Active Albania. We will have the director of Roma Active Albania here. We also have Central Council for German and Sinti Roma who are participating. We also have our hosting members of the parliament, Petr Polák and Roma of France, who is already here with us. So also warm welcome to you. So thank you, and let's turn and move to the addressing anti-Gypsum in the strategies for the Western Balkan and Turkey.
anyways, they will speak, so...
No, but it's important. If you want to have Romanes, it's important. Welcome back. We still wait 2 minutes for the translation into Romanes. You cannot hear me? We still wait 2 minutes for the translation in Romanes.
Because I don't know if they understand.
But we don't have different languages. We're waiting for Romanes to come. Welcome back. I apologize for the delay, but I think it's very important we do the things right. We do the things right. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? I think I'm louder. Can you hear me now? Okay. At least I hope we're listening from the online audience. Are you still with me? You can follow Romanes in 25. Can you hear me now? Yes. It's very interesting that I have to shout so much to be listening in this room. Perhaps that's what it means to be listened and to be understood as well. We would have Romanes in channel 25, Bishop Punch, and then we don't have Romanes in the, I guess, in the panel because it's going to be in English. So therefore, without losing more time, welcome back in the first, if I may call, technical panel. Thank you very much for the introductory remarks. The colleagues who spoke from UN Commission and European Parliament did make, I think, an easy job for our discussion that would also be engaged in a more, let's say, in a technical level, but also highlighting some of the importance and challenge when it comes to Western Balkans, Turkey, and the Europe or European Union. In any discussion we do, it wouldn't have any relevance if the Western Balkans and Turkey are not only mentioned, but also engaged on equal foot, not so much on the discussion, but also on supporting the long way to achieve the inclusion for Roma at the end of our work. Having said that, I'm very happy to have here with me Marta Garcia Fidalgo, the senior advisor from the DG NEAR, which we call it in abbreviation. It has a long name, Director General for Negotiation and Neighborhood, if I'm correct. And also Maria Suleimanova, the program manager from Romalitico, Senada Sali, the legal director from the European Roma Rights Center, and Dan Pavel Dogi, the team leader from Non-Discrimination and Roma Coordination Unit DG Justice, which is in the same long name, DG General for Justice and Consumers, if I'm correct. So having said that, you could see that the panelists, it's combined from the institution and the strongest voice of civic society we have across the panel, and not only. It is very important to also highlight that from the perspective note, from a personal note, most of you know that I am a doctor by professions, and usually the way the doctors work, they would need to have the proper diagnosis in order to give the right medicine. So I think we are having the proper diagnosis. We are addressing anti-Gypsyism and fighting it until that's the root causes of Roma exclusion. And therefore, the work, it's restarting again from the beginning. It's restarting in the sense that we need to mobilize many actors and many people to fight against anti-Gypsyism, which is one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge that Roma are facing in everyday life. Without further ado, I would like to turn to Marta. Marta has been working in, I would say, in the last decade, if it doesn't sound
6 years.
6 years. Within engaging the Commission from the not only from the enlargement perspective, but also supporting the path of the enlargement countries, and I call enlargement include all the countries, towards the European, we call it integration, but let's say it inclusion in the new terminology we would like to use. And on the Roma file, Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriatic, and thank you for inviting us and putting both in the title of this event, but also in your introductory words, the enlargement region up in the agenda. So the concept of anti-Gypsyism has born not so long ago. Even if the problems, the discrimination exists for a long time. But now I think it's positive that thanks also to the work of the civil society, we have a name, anti-Gypsyism, that capture clearly the discrimination of Roma. And I think, and the need to fight these discriminations. In the 2020-2030 EU framework for Roma equality, inclusion and participation, this concept, the anti-Gypsyism, has been given an institutional dimension. It's not only a concept that has use, but it's a concept that belongs to the EU acquis, to the EU rules. And I think this is very important because that will open the door to fight more clearly and also with EU tools these problems. And what about the enlargement region? Because as Tiku has said, that's my area of work. And when I say enlargement region, I mean the 6 Western Balkan countries and Turkey. The concept did not exist for the broad public until very recently, and it has been difficult to include this concept. I have to share that even it has been and remains difficult to find the right translation in the local languages. But I think mirroring what it has been done on the EU framework 2020-2030, the enlargement region has adopted new strategies and action plans to implement the EU framework. And in this, I have to say that this strategies and action plan has been adopted in all countries except for the time being Kosovo and Turkey, and we hope it will be adopted in the near future. But with this move, we have again give this institutional value and dimension to the fight, the anti-Gypsyism. I think this is all especially important in the enlargement region because for the first time in this enlargement round, the Roma inclusion objective is part of the negotiation. It's part of what we call the Chapter 23, Judiciary and Fundamental Rights, that is discussed with the enlargement countries and will be part of the conditions to become a member state. And if you look closely, there is a big list of actions that need to be fulfilled, but these Western Balkan countries and Turkey in the Roma inclusion area to be member state. And I think this is a very wise, useful tool that we have further to develop. But understanding, knowing, stating that the concept is there, anti-Gypsyism, that is known by the broader public and all national institutions, that is institutionalized also in the enlargement region. Now it starts the most important phase, its implementation. And this is a challenge that we all have to take with all kind of energy and passion, and that will be for the next 10 years one of the main work, because we all know that without not only fighting, but getting success in this fight of anti-Gypsyism will be the only way to deblock the potential, the contribution of the Romani community to the socioeconomic development of its country. So I'm going to stop here and let the rest for the discussion, taking into account that in the Commission we have long names. I won't do long interventions.
Thank you very much for highlighting some of the most important elements of our discussion and that are relevant for the enlargement region. Without further ado, I would like to invite Maria Suleimanova for her statement when it comes to the role of civic society. What are the challenges and how they can be overcome also in the line with the institutional setup? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriatic, for passing me the floor, and thank you for inviting me on this panel. If in the previous sessions we were talking about including anti-Gypsyism in national strategy, finally now we have the anti-Gypsyism part in the national strategy. And talking specifically about North Macedonia, the country where I'm coming from, we do also have the anti-Gypsyism in the national strategy in the form as it was recommended by the European Union. And in the strategy, actually, we can see that anti-Gypsyism has basically two parts. First one, it's the introduction of the anti-Gypsyism on a national and a local level. And then we have the connection of anti-Gypsyism with the other parts or objectives, actually, of the strategy. And I need to highlight that, yes, anti-Gypsyism is actually one of the main objectives of the national strategy. Talking actually about the term anti-Gypsyism, as Marta mentioned, we do have the translation, which is anti-Tsiganism. And thinking about the role of the NGO sector, definitely one of the roles of the NGO sector, of the civil society, would be to actually try to make the community also understand the concept and why we actually decided to use this term on the institutional level. So we will have to communicate closely with the community to understand, to make them understand, to give them the knowledge. As well as we are going to do that also with the institutions. So it's something that should be done at the same time. But when talking about the measures that we have in the national strategy, because we had many discussions previously about, as I said at the beginning, about anti-Gypsyism. What we have now, what we were advocating for many years, in the national strategy, yes, we have exactly the introduction of the concept on the institutional level, also introduction of the concept and including actually the concept in the legislation and in the public policies, as well as giving knowledge to those people that are working in the institutions, such as judges, teachers, and public servants. When it comes also to the collaboration of the NGO sector, important part that I have to mention, it's the collaboration that we will have to do with the institutions when it comes to data gathering and actually monitoring the process of implementation of the measures in the national strategy. And here I'm referring to the data of hate crimes, of hate speech and the other actions which are actually under anti-Gypsyism. I have to also remind us of the past 2 years and why actually anti-Gypsyism is so important and the work that we are going to do in the future. Because, I mean, I can highlight many things, but I would like to mention 3, let's say, important topics that we were covering through this period. What we could notice during the pandemic, as you all know, it's also the increased level of hate speech on the social media, but also in the public discourse created also from the media. Secondly, we were also talking at the beginning of this panel about police brutality. Here I have to also mention the Macedonian case that we had on police brutality happening in the town of Bitola, for which we have the first ever judgment condemning police brutality with a jail sentence. Unfortunately, the second instance court brought back the judgment to the first instance court. So now we are again going to see what will happen, unfortunately, with the judgment. And the third thing that I would like to mention are the censuses in the countries, because working on the census campaign, what we could see as we say the root of the problem is the anti-Gypsyism. Well, it's the same when it comes to census, because we could notice many forms of manipulations on the field, and we are now advocating for actually having a separate census like the Slovak Atlas. To be also, I mean, implemented in North Macedonia. I have many things to say, but I would finish with something that I have noticed from my personal experience working on campaigns. When it comes to a driving force, or I would say the biggest topic that could mobilize the Roma community is actually racism. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for highlighting and focusing on Macedonia, but also these are some of the issues that are quite common in all our enlargement countries. And we heard already for set of policies and strategies that are there, and then the adopting of the definition from several countries. But anti-Gypsyism is not only what has been said and what has been done, it's also what has not been said and what has not been done as well. Having said that, I would like to invite Dan. What is to be expected on the forthcoming periods from the European Commission?
Thank you, Adriatic. I will start with a brief answer to your question and then go through the points that I prepared. What is to be expected? As you know, the European Commission has adopted in October 2020 a new and strengthened EU Roma strategic framework focusing on 3 pillars for equality, inclusion and participation. It was followed by a Council recommendation unanimously adopted by Member States in March 2021. And with it, Member States were encouraged to develop and adopt new national Roma strategic frameworks mirroring or emulating the EU Roma strategic framework. And one important objective of this new framework is the fight against anti-Roma racism, anti-Gypsyism and discrimination. Currently, the European Commission is assessing these newly developed and adopted national Roma strategic frameworks and will produce a communication assessment report to be adopted this autumn. Now, with my points, I would like to thank Ergo Network, the organizers of this event, to acknowledge the honorable members of the European Parliament, Mr. Romeo Franz, here with us, and also the host of the Romani Week, distinguished speakers and participants. Peñalen, Pralalen, Sembutlo Shaloke, Semtumenza Ades,
here with you today in this rather important meeting where we are discussing about the theme of racism against Roma people, both within and outside the European Union.
And thoughts shared by our previous speakers today in the introductory part and also colleagues in this panel. A number of my points are echoing and reinforcing the expressed views. Anti-Roma racism and its forms of manifestations, known as anti-Gypsyism, damages our societies and prevents Roma from enjoying on equal footing their fundamental rights. And it precludes them from participating meaningfully in the public and political life of their societies. EU Fundamental Rights Agency's discrimination survey found out that 80% of Roma continue to live below the at-risk of poverty threshold of their country, and that every 4th Roma live in a household that faced hunger at least once in the previous month. To ensure equality and non-discrimination and equip us all with tools to fight the ethnic-based hate speech and hate crimes, the EU has adopted important legally binding instruments, which are the Racial Equality Directive and the Council Framework Decision on combating racism and xenophobia. The Racial Equality Directive prohibits both direct and indirect discrimination based on ethnicity. I would like to remind the importance of the new and strengthened EU Roma strategic framework, which are now set for the current decade until 2030. It has to be worked on together with the Council recommendation and as part of the nationally adopted Roma strategic frameworks. Large segments of the Roma population throughout Europe continue to live their lives at the fringes of our society. They are proactively pushed to the margins of localities through measures of forced eviction. Millions of Roma within or outside EU live in extreme poverty, literally from one day to another, lacking any prospects for a dignified future, being failed by their societies from one generation to another. Segregation, both spatial and educational, is largely accepted and seen as something normal by a number of states, with a minimum of action on their side to put an end to this most abject demonstration of rejection, of telling the Roma they do not matter, that they do not belong, and they are outsiders. Anti-Roma racism and its forms of expression through anti-Gypsyism is multifaceted and structural. This is practiced and perpetuated through the educational system, in the work collective, taking the form of harassment, intimidation, and group mobbing, by restricting access to public spaces, through biased media portrayal and public campaigns of nationalist extremism and populist politicians, and also at the hand of the law enforcement. The ultimate demonstration of anti-Roma racism is the widespread phenomenon of impunity for such acts and crimes, of whose perpetrators escape justice. We often witness how outright racist statements and incitement to hatred against the Roma, as made by state dignitaries or high-profile politicians, go unchallenged and unpunished. Unfortunately, here we have to mention some regular incidents involving members of the European Parliament. As long as impunity against anti-Roma racism and anti-Gypsyism seems to be the norm, and the message that is given out in the society that it is acceptable to be racist towards the Roma, and there is little consequence to such conduct, we cannot hope to achieve substantial progress in securing equality for Roma. I still remember how a police officer in Krompachi, Slovakia, which was under quarantine in April 2020, has used a truncheon to beat 5 young children. A year after, our Roma MEP Peter Polak and the then Slovak government plenipotentiary for Romani communities, Andrea Bučková, have filed a criminal complaint. The investigations are still ongoing 2 years after. Let us not forget that justice delayed is justice denied. I would also like to refer to the situation of Roma in the context of the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine. Together with the millions of refugees, Roma are also trying to escape the dangers. A series of vulnerabilities have been identified and reported, and that include a lack of identification documents, separated children, and biased attitudes. Some reports indicate that groups of Roma were not provided the same kind of humanitarian assistance as other refugees, being accused of not being genuine refugees or for taking advantage of humanitarian aid, or that they intend to abuse the welfare system of EU countries. The EC is very clear, the European Commission is very clear on its stance that all refugees and vulnerable people should be allowed and be helped to securely flee the war, even if they do not have an ID document, and that the humanitarian help and services are provided equally to all refugees. Anti-Roma racism, anti-Gypsyism, discrimination, exclusion and segregation of Roma are at the opposite of the fundamental values of the European Union, and they are in total conflict with the goals of the Union of Equality. We all must work together more efficiently and smarter to combine our collective knowledge and wisdom so that the EU strategic framework for Roma and its related Council recommendation can deliver and achieve the established headline targets by 2030. I thank you again for the invitation and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dan, for your intervention. Because we are a bit late, because we also started a bit late, and in order to get more time, I'd like to invite Senada Sanli for the litigation perspective on how this discussion would be embedded into the legal debate. Senada, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Shukar Divesarinenge. I'm going to speak in English. I just wanted to greet you in Romanes. It's very hard to speak about litigation in Romanes, and I feel bad about it because I think that as a Roma lawyer, I should be able to speak more in Romanes when I talk to the community about legal terms. But anyways, in this moment right now, I'm going just to throw some ideas on litigation regarding to anti-Gypsyism, because it's, in 7 minutes, it's basically impossible for me to describe what is going on regarding litigation and anti-Gypsyism. It's such a hard topic for me, and I take it every time emotional, no matter the fact that I'm a lawyer and I shouldn't be emotional. When it comes to addressing anti-Gypsyism through legal actions, the most frequent question that I'm asked by journalists, by other lawyers, by other NGOs is, how is the situation in enlargement countries compared to EU countries when it comes to respect of Roma rights? And it's very hard for me to qualify it, because as a Romani person and somebody working on legal cases, I would say everywhere is bad. Everyone is racist. Both in enlargement countries and both in EU countries, we have to work a lot in order to improve the situation. But then when we see the implementation part, I think the key conclusion that I came up to, especially in the last period after we had a Slovak minister contacting us and asking to conclude a friendly settlement of a case, basically begging the applicant to agree about friendly settlement, I discovered that actually the fact that Slovakia is a member of EU, it gives us more potential in concluding these cases in a better way, including mediation and friendly settlement, and we have governments that have more pressure to align to standards rather than enlargement countries where we are really hoping that because of their wish to be part of EU, they will do something. Yeah, this is just my self-reflection on the question, where is better, in EU countries or in enlargement countries when it comes to anti-Gypsyism, addressing in a legal form anti-Gypsyism. So inspired by a reference paper of the Alliance of Anti-Gypsyism, the ERRC decided to include the word anti-Gypsyism throughout all the legal actions that we are taking, both on domestic level and both on international level. And as you already know, we had been doing that for a longer time already in front of the European Court of Human Rights. We have been trying to pursue judges to use the word anti-Gypsyism in their judgments, in their decisions, and that has been a hard path, a hard way. The best thing that we managed so far is to have the court quote us and say the ERRC also referred to the so-called anti-Gypsyism, so referring to our statement. Why we try to achieve this is that we don't want Roma rights abuse to be seen as isolated cases. We want the court to recognize this background, this historical background of anti-Gypsyism. And we already know that what we can best get from the European Court of Human Rights is categorizing Roma as disadvantaged and vulnerable minority. Now, when it comes to our legal strategy, there was some shift in the last 2 years regarding what we want to achieve on domestic level, on the level of the country. We had been supporting in the past individual cases as well of Roma rights violations, but we saw that solving an individual case, it's not really bringing so much impact as it would if we would have taken mass complaints. So our focus in the last 2 years is bringing mass complaints before equality bodies and ombudspersons. And the reason for that is that the Racial Equality Directive that was already mentioned by Dan, it's actually binding and obliging countries to establish equality bodies that will deal with matters of racial discrimination. So we file mass complaints both in EU countries and in non-EU countries before ombudspersons and equality bodies. For non-EU countries, we have local NGOs that are cooperating with the ERRC, and they're doing that on behalf of communities. And the reason why This is our choice right now, a part of the fact that is dealing with the strategic and with the more systemic problems of Roma and anti-Gypsyism is the fact that these are free of charge complaints. Because at the end of the day, we have spent so much money to litigate on behalf of Roma rights, and at the end what we get is actually paying huge procedural costs to courts and to states, when actually this money have to come to our people, to our communities. So using the equality bodies and ombudsmans, it's so much better way to just stop making governments reach on behalf of Roma. Then an example that I would give, recently we had a positive experience with North Macedonia's new reformed equality body, which brought a positive opinion finding school segregation in one of the schools in the town of Štip. So this case is already in front of the European Court of Human Rights, and what was useful is that the opinion of the equality body could have, we could use it in front of the European Court of Human Rights, saying we have a state formed body that it's agreeing with us that there is discrimination in this case, and it was really helpful. Apart from that, my advice would be also, my recommendation would be that local organizations also improve their cooperation with equality bodies and send more complaints to equality bodies. As I said, it's free of charge, and it gives us the opportunity for Roma rights to be heard more on domestic level without money, and then those cases can be used for international litigation as well. Another strategy that we implement for a longer time, but especially in the last 2 years, is the pursuit of Actio Popularis cases. Again, mass number of people having the same concern, big group of Romani communities having the same concerns. For example, access to water, discrimination in access to water, where we have communities involving over 150 people with over 50 to 60 children. And the benefit of Actio Popularis cases is that we protect the identity of the persons. We don't impose them directly in front of court bodies and state institutions, but it's the NGO actually that it's visible in the complaint itself, but the outcome or the finding of discrimination is the one that it directly relates to the communities themselves. And I decided to talk about positive outcomes again, so I would share the example of positive judgment in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I talk about this very proudly because ERC hasn't done much work in Bosnia and Herzegovina for longer time. It is a case of access to water of a Romani camp in Zenica. For those of you that come from Bosnia, probably know about it. It's called Banlozi camp. And we managed to secure a judgment finding discrimination in access to water of the Romani community, and we are currently initiating also a compensation procedure for all the people, including children, that are living in this community. And the third shift, or the third action that is novel for the ERC's work, is us establishing a Roma rights network in order to bring joint actions with other Roma rights organizations all around Europe. And this is something that is really novel initiative, and we will wait to see what will happen from this. It's a test for us as well, because we didn't have such an initiative before. Now a bit quantitative. I don't know how much time I have, but I would just like to give you an overview of what is going on when it comes to numbers. At the beginning of 2022, we currently have 164 active cases of Roma rights violations that connect to acts that have anti-Gypsyism background, that deal with breach of rights of Romani people. Out of those, 15 cases are new, and they are for the area of Western Balkan, and 14 cases are for the EU countries. So when we see actually the numbers 15 against 14, that gives us actually this impression that racism happens equally both in EU and non-EU countries. And when it comes to country dispersion of the cases, majority of the cases currently right now are from EU countries are against Slovakia, and from non-EU countries against North Macedonia. Now, I don't want you to conclude that in these two countries there is more racism, the level of racism is higher, because this also depends from our work on the field, our contacts with the community and discovering those cases, and also the willingness of the people to talk to us about their issues and to take legal measures. And I'm going to wrap it up just by sharing with you a few more cases on litigation and basically putting an emphasis on the friendly settlement option that has been more common the last year before the European Court of Human Rights. We have managed to settle in North Macedonia mainly 3 prison death cases, which were granted 6,000 euros per person. And why I'm mentioning this is because this gives us the estimation of how much a Roma life matters to the European Court of Human Rights. And apart from prison death cases, we also had cases of freedom of movement, the very well-known racial profiling cases, where every applicant was getting 2,500 euros for a rights violation. And it's also giving us perspective how much a freedom of movement is valued by the European Court of Human Rights. Other cases that are interesting, and maybe you can check them as well, because I'm limited now with the time, and they connect to collective violations of Roma rights, not individual cases per se, are cases of discrimination of Romani children in correctional centers. I don't know how many organizations deal with this matter, with juvenile justice and correctional centers, but it would be really good if there is more interest about this topic and more research being done on domestic level in order to be able to file better cases. And also the issue of substance abuse, which is seen with a lot of prejudice among activists themselves as well, but it's something that we also have to be more aware of it and pressure governments and health authorities especially to provide treatment and access to health care for substance abusers that come from Romani background as well. So that is in short. Thank you.
It was short, okay. Thank you very much, Senada. Unfortunately, I have made a very difficult decision that we will not have question and answer in this moment because we are ahead of time, and I hope also the panelists would agree with it. But if there are any, we would address them if that is time within the next panel. So thank you very much, dear panelists, for your contribution. I think it has been quite an interesting discussion when it comes to highlighting some of the challenges and what needs to be done when it comes to fight anti-Gypsyism in our countries. And the fight can not only be in a meeting like this or being discussed in a meeting like this, should be there in our daily work, in our daily life with institution, with local institution in particular. Therefore, I would welcome now the last panel, moderated by Mustafa Yakupov, the Policy and Project Coordinator of Ergo Network, Katalin Barsoni, Director of Euromedia Foundation, which I think she will get connected online, Selma Muhic-Dizdarevic, Yuli Pasko from ENAR, and Isak Skanderi from Voice of Roma Ashkali and Egyptian Kosovo. I wish you to be successful as we. No, there is no break. It's the, yeah. Unfortunately, we have to go with this marathon.
Thank you very much. Let's kick off the second panel, where we will be discussing what a decade against anti-Gypsyism should look like, or what is the concept behind it. What does large-scale awareness raising about this phenomenon means? Will it reach our communities? Are we on the right path? Should we build more awareness around it? And if yes, what kind of awareness we need around it? And with me in this panel, I have quite some interesting guests with different backgrounds, but they all are working in the topic directly or indirectly, intersectionally or not. With me is Katalin Barsoni, from the director from the Romedia Foundation. I have Selma Muhic-Dizdarevic, who is a lecturer at the Charles University Humanities Studies and also board member of the International Network Against Cyber Hate. With me is also Julie Pascot, the senior advocacy advisor from INAR, and also Isak Skenderi, from the director from the Voice of Roma Ashkali, an Egyptian from Kosovo. And without further delaying this panel, as we are running quite late already, I would invite Katalin to start. She's joining us online. And my question actually to Katalin is, we're talking about large-scale awareness raising about anti-Gypsyism, right? And you, as working in the field of media a bit more, but also raising awareness on various topics within the Romedia Foundation, how do you see this? What can we produce as a narrative or counter-narrative when we tackle the issue of anti-Gypsyism? So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mustafa. Thank you very much for having me today. I will be referring a little later to your question. I prepared some interesting words. So Tavim Bachtali Romale, a good day, good morning to all of you. The treatment of my fellow Romani people fleeing the war in Ukraine demonstrates a deep-seated discrimination of our community, a phrase still across the European continent. And I'm referring to the actions and policies of certain EU member states, including Hungary and the Czech Republic, where Romani people escaping war-torn Ukraine faced discrimination upon seeking refuge and received second-class, substandard treatment compared to other refugees. Referring to earlier intervention by Dan Doge from the Commission, we as civic society members, we urge the close monitoring of the situation, and we would like to urge equal treatment of our fellow Romani refugees. Especially in conflict situations, we are reminded that Roma frequently face discrimination, hatred, and multiply disadvantages in attempting to seek services generously provided to non-Roma communities. This is a barrier to development and has serious costs both for our communities and for the European society as a whole. This is why it is utmost important that we strengthen our solidarity with our fellow Romani people fleeing the war in Ukraine. We learned during the Balkan Wars that in the times of a crisis, a conflict, Roma and other minorities are among the hardest hit. Solidarity and concrete support using the measures set out in the national EU Roma strategy frameworks are vital to address the urgent needs faced by the Roma refugees. But today we need solidarity, most of all, to address the urgent needs of our Ukrainian Roma peers fleeing the war. Several civic society initiatives, along with local and regional authorities, and for-profit partners took urgent steps in the region and developed effective responses to ensure the mainstream services and additional targeted support are available to all Roma, and their efforts needs to be saluted. It is true broad sectoral cooperation among various stakeholders and long-term strategic effort that structural inequalities can be addressed and eliminated. This will require commitment on several levels. It's, the use of social impact analysis in all policy proposals, the support of capacity building, the effort through the establishment of institutionalized civic society collaborative system, and most of all, ambitious projects that seek to shrink the social and digital divide between our communities. In the future, we need greater cooperation among the various actors working on Romani inclusion. Broad sectoral cooperations, policies that promote inclusion and mainstream inclusivity. At the local level, we need policies that tackle inclusion from a norm-critical and intersectional perspective. We must apply a holistic and integrated approach to diversity and inclusion, work that not only addresses the discrimination faced by individuals, but the structures which cause discrimination. We need policy plans that are action-oriented and focused on contemporary needs, taking into account the gender equality, the gender violence, social participation, the communication, the cultural needs of our fellow Romani citizens. In order to develop effective actions that combat anti-Gypsyism and anti-Roman stereotypes, we must build a culture of support and inclusion and recognize the contribution of Roma people to our societies, our culture, and our common cultural heritage. In this regard, cultural products we produce at Roma Media Foundation also present Romani language and heritage have a great potential. I think every child should be able to discover Romani heroes and heroines and become familiar with our culture. Ultimately,
it seems that Katalin disconnected? Or she's back? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, please continue.
Yes, so answering your question, Mustafa, Roma Media Foundation for the past 30 years in Hungary has been fighting to develop those counter-narratives and still is supporting a wide network of filmmakers around Europe to be able to continue their work. And among them are Petro Rushanenko, who is based in Ukraine, who is coming from a minority background, and also others, whose work is well, in some countries, well discovered, but in some other countries are totally silenced. And what we are trying to do is that we develop these original stories that use the elements of our culture, the strength of our culture, fairy tales, traditional songs, the way how we see the work, and develop through those narratives a new meaning and try to convince non-Roma people about the spectrum and the colors of beauties of our culture, while at the very same time strengthen the identity of our fellow Romani young people who are facing, everyday anti-Gypsyism and the result of the structural racism that we face in the educational system, in the health system, or while searching for a new home. Thank you.
Thank you, Katalin. Indeed, there is an urgency for equal treatment, but also the counter-narrative that we have a rich history, that content that we can develop that could be original Roma content based on our fairy tales, songs, stories, history, but also then we need cooperation and solidarity among all of us in order to build this culture of support. Without further delaying, I would invite Selma Muhic-Dizdarevic and ask her about the what's the narrative online a bit? What's the current narrative in the Czech Republic? Because you are also coming from there. What's the situation with the anti-Gypsies narrative there, and what we are seeing also online?
Thank you. Thank you, Mustafa, for chairing the panel. Thank you, Ergo, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Well, so I maybe, in answering this question, I also had a plan to say something based on my research experience with Roma women in the Czech Republic, and then say something about the current situation of the Ukrainian Roma refugees, whose tent city was coincidentally open just next to my faculty building, for the building where I work. And then to say something about the online situation and the resources that we have and what I think we should do more. So if that's okay with you, then I would just want to say this. Maybe this will be a bit controversial or not popular, but this is like my research and what how I interpret it, and you're welcome to interpret it differently. So number one, with Roma women, it's interesting that the Czech Roma women group, when it was established, it didn't have the support from either some parts of the Roma community, but also from, or neither from, the mainstream feminist movement, let's say, which was very surprising. At least for me. So the reason being that, the Roma women are embedded in these traditional structures, their husbands or fathers would not allow them to participate, and yeah, okay, so that was shocking in a way. This group was established, now it exists for more than 20 years. It's very successful, but it's very important to listen to women who are involved in these groups, including those who left it. And this is a bit of a critique or criticizing the civil society organizations. We heard a lot about how governments fail. We know that businesses also fail to support equality, but I think it is our duty to be aware of how civil society organizations can and sometimes fail. Also, on the example of Roma women, that many of the projects are organized in such a way that they should trickle down to the population they're working with, but that doesn't happen. That women are encouraged to participate in the programs only to be left on their own when the programs are over. That some of the activities make no sense but are part of the projects and they get carried out anyway, like, for example, some of the women quoted examples of being placed in hotels for a couple of days but then go home to their equally hungry and deprived families. And finally, also the participation of Roma people in the civil society. Sometimes, as some of my respondents said, they organize a festival, we get there, we share sweets or maybe sing, but then we go home to our own problems, and for those who are in these organizations, it's a job. So I wanted to warn about this, because some of my Czech Roma respondents, some of the women, and one of them particularly, who I hold in high esteem and in a way try to learn from her, she got so put off by this approach because she activated and organized a lot of Romani women for requalification courses. And then, the state says, okay, we will provide support for 6 months, and after 6 months, they're equally unemployed in the end, So my view of this is, it's not enough just to fight anti-Gypsyism. We also need to focus on improving of the standard of living for as many Roma as possible. And that brings me to the point number 2 now with the Ukrainian refugees. First of all, you should know in 2015 that the attitude of the Czech establishment was not a single refugee. Not orphans, not unaccompanied minors, nobody is going to get refuge here. So now what happened is that the Ukrainian refugees, it's the other extreme, it's almost like adoration. Everybody is mobilizing privately, publicly, and so on, if they are not Roma. So our own indigenous Czech anti-Gypsyism connected to this new, let's say, group to which anti-Gypsyism is focused. And in a way, we are helpless now because we didn't deal with our own problems of anti-Gypsyism. And that's why some of my respondents, like this woman that I mentioned, and I wish she was here with me today, who commented, because we have an ongoing debate in the Czech Republic about ethnic data collection and many issues related to that. And she said many problems of the current Czech Roma come from losing their identity, losing their language, losing their understanding of their historical roots. For example, she said, why is it so that so many Roma are now in the position that, for example, they don't work or they don't have the skills? And then she said, I studied my own family. All the people who knew the trades, who had the skills, were killed in the Second World War. There was no one to transfer that knowledge to us. And she said a lot of people in the Czech Republic, like Czech Roma, have this inner conflict. You know, they would like to present themselves as Czech. At the same time, they are rejected. She even made a performance on Facebook when she put like white paint on her face and said, okay, am I white now? Is this discrimination over? Many interesting things come from this dialogue I have with the Czech Roma women community, which I don't have now time to present. But if you have any interest in this, here I am. And finally, something about online situation. I participated in the monitoring exercise organized by European Commission annually. And this time I did it with Roma students who received scholarship from the Czech NGO called Romea. And I was really cautious at the beginning, I was giving them some examples and I felt ashamed to even turn their attention to this. And then I was shocked when actually they flooded me with the examples of anti-Gypsyist comments online. And I understood for them, this is like a daily situation. It's not something that they would be shocked by. And that really hurt me in a way. And I felt like, it's terrible that anyone has to live with this. Now, with online anti-Gypsyism, you can read the results of the monitoring exercises by the European Commission. So the anti-Gypsyism wasn't even classified as the type of hate that the Commission is monitoring, and that started a couple of years ago. And now, because I have already experience with this, I said we need more Roma organizations to participate in this and to turn the attention to anti-Gypsyism. Because if you have only LGBT, for example, organizations, they're going to follow this. Everybody follows what they are able to follow. And that's why I think we should join forces and promote this issue. And then also, finally, maybe I would like to say something about how we can, improve this situation. And we are here also in a kind of bubble and, civil society bubble, let's say. But there's so many things that have already been done and the projects carried out and the skills. And we created in the International Network Against Cyber Hate a kind of like platform, which is called rememberandact.eu. I will share it with you later on, where you can find enormous resources on anti-Gypsyism, that who knows in what context you can use them and how you can innovate or something like that. So that would be also my message, like, you know, we should not always be forced by these project applications to claim that we are discovering something new or we are doing something new. There is a lot of synergy and potential for synergy also among all these the organizations. And finally, it's like an anecdote. Another person I work with is a Czech Roma. He also should have been here today. In my opinion, he's one of the biggest Czech intellectuals currently, and not only like among Roma, but generally. And I think I can judge that fairly because I spend my life among the intellectuals. When we started cooperating, I told him, look, it's too complicated now to go to that office, come to my place. And, you know, I noticed a bit that he was startled by that, because in the Czech culture, and my culture is a Balkan culture, so it's different there as well. It's not so common to invite people, and then especially it's not common for Roma people to be invited. So he came to visit, and then after all, he came many times to work with me there, and my neighbors were looking at him almost like in shock, and they were staring at him, and I was staring back at these neighbors. But I realized he's not. He has to choose his battles. He cannot fight every incident of anti-Gypsyism that happens, which is again just shows you, you know, the difficulties of the situation and the importance of fighting back in a prudent way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Selma. Indeed, I mean, we need to look into sustainable ways to address issues, and also when tackling issues of anti-Gypsyism, to consider also the various dimensions it's happening, but also then improving the standards of living of Roma communities while addressing it. And also, again, the word of finding synergy and joining forces. Maybe I would just use on the table there, we have the PECO report, which is also an online anti-Gypsyist hate speech, and for the first time, it was a synthesis report supported by Google.org and DG Justice, and we elaborated data from 10 European countries that you can have a look at, and it only focuses on anti-Gypsyist hate speech online, which was done by young people. So thank you very much, Selma. I'm switching now towards Julie from the European Network Against Racism. We are talking about synergies and the issue of intersectionality when it comes to addressing anti-Gypsyism, but also I think we can find similarities or ways of collaboration when we look into the general framework of what racism represents. So I would give you the floor and ask you, what about these synergies and how we could join this into a more, let's say, intersectional way of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Hello, everybody. So here I will more talk from a perspective of what kind of mobilization and advocacy strategy we can use, especially from my experience at EU level, to fight against racism, including anti-Gypsyism, so also centering the issue of anti-Gypsyism. And in our solidarity and work across group is actually in its DNA, because we represent a wide diversity of racialized groups, a wide diversity of NGOs across the EU. We have been member of and we are still member of the Roma Coalition at EU level and the Alliance Against Anti-Gypsyism, and alongside key partners such as ERGO, such as ERC, such as Central Council for Roma and Sinti in Germany, La Voix des Roms in France. We have been advocating for the recognition and strong actions against anti-Gypsyism when it was, during the previous framework and also for the new framework. So it's really something that we have been quite involved in from the beginning, because it was essential to actually recognize the root cause of exclusion of Roma, and initially in the framework, it was not the case. It was essential to actually recognize the decades of persecutions and targeting Roma in Europe, and also how it was still impacting their daily lives today. And we see actually that despite a lot of policies and despite a lot of also public statements from key policymakers, we still see that racial prejudices against Roma are still persistent and are also really embedded in structures and institutions and preventing Roma from reaching equity and justice. So as much as it's important to understand the specificities of Roma experiences and implement these key measures that really target this specific manifestation, we also believe at INA that there is no way to tackle the structural racism that Roma are affected by if we don't understand how racism in general is playing out in society and how it's affecting racialized groups, including Roma, and how it's interconnected with other systems of inequalities. So, and this I also want to take the example of our report on intersectional discrimination that we have issued with the Center for Intersectional Justice, where we actually highlight the different dimensions of discriminations. And it's really giving us also a very interesting overview, also an analysis of how racism is playing out in society. And we highlight different dimensions: individual, historical, structural, institutional. And we also analyze that there has been, at the EU and national level, there has been a strong focus on individual interpersonal forms of discrimination for a reason, of course. I mean, when we talk about hate crime, this is one of the most extreme form of act of racism. But at the same time, it has been also sometimes convenient for institutions to not look at the deeper deeper structural systems of discrimination when it comes to police violence, when it comes to migration policies, when it comes to security policies that are actually really contributing to embed racial prejudices in society. And also sometimes focusing on this individual form of discrimination has also depoliticized racism and has also prevented us from analyzing racism as operating in a system. Because individual racism doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's also coming from somewhere, as much as sexism is also happening because there is structures that are perpetrating and also fueling this kind of discrimination. And also, what is very important and what we highlight in our report is that we, as much as we need to question and analyze racism, we also need to question other kinds of inequalities and how they interconnect. We were talking about standards of living. How do we understand racism as interconnected with current economic systems? How it's connecting to patriarchy, to homophobia, etc. So all these systems that are actually also targeting Roma. And I want to quote here Audre Lorde that is saying that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Roma are also women, Roma women from LGBTQ, Black, Muslim, with disabilities, etc. So there is really this importance to look at racism, yes, but also to look at other kinds of oppressions to be able to really target the systems that are in place and to re-tackle them. And I just would like to stress on several ways to move forward and improve the way we tackle not improve, but like maybe be more efficient or at least like move forward in tackling anti-Gypsyism. So one very important point is on which INA is really hardly working on is fostering solidarity across groups and fostering participation of racialized groups. Racism is about denying power and humanity. And of course, that's also why participation is central. And from the beginning, I know that IRGO had this as a priority in working on the framework. Solidarity across groups. I mean, when we look at police violence, when we look at violent evictions, when we look at violent pushbacks at borders, these are also affect Roma, but also Black people, Muslim people, different groups that are actually being racialized, that are being dehumanized, demonized in society because of their perceived and assumed race. And these are racialized people are affected by these same power structures, the police in this case. And this is really important there. How do we actually tackle these structures? By building solidarity, by having a stronger front against these structures. And INA is working hard actually to ensure that anti-Gypsyism is well understood in its network, that we cooperate with Roma organizations, and that we actually build stronger solidarity, also to go against attempts to try to divide us, because there are attempts to divide us. There are attempts to pity one community against another, and this is we really shouldn't fall into the trap. One of recently what we have set up to try to work when it comes to advocacy on a wider coalition is the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan Coalition. We work with Ergo and other organizations. We try to advocate on the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan together to ensure that all forms of racism are mainstreamed and all racialized groups are included and their issues are addressed. The second point is how do we link anti-Gypsyism with other forms of inequalities? How do we question all oppression systems, as I was mentioning? For example, when we talk about environmental racism, we cannot tackle environmental racism without questioning the capitalistic system, the neoliberalism system. This is actually and we have also mentioned it in our report recently, in a report on environmental racism. This is actually really intertwined, and we cannot tackle racism here without looking at that. And to finish, I will just mention that we also need to ensure racial equality mainstreaming and policy coherence. And we see a multiplication of plans to reach equality, which is very good, because this is a way to actually really acknowledge the specificities, to have specific targeted measures. But however, I think we still have a way to go to ensure they are interconnected, that they are really questioning power structures. For example, we have the Race Equality Directive, indeed, but its Race Equality Directive is not actually covering, for the moment, actions by public sectors. And here we talk, for example, about the police and border control. So these are really important aspects. And I really focus on these issues of police, of migration, of security, because these are, as I was mentioning, these are areas where that are used to criminalize our people, and that are used actually to embed racial prejudices and to use prejudices against our people. And on this, I will just finish by saying this is really important to have Roma organizations involved also in advocacy around the National Action Plan Against Racism, around the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. There are also Roma strategies, but this is really important that, we connect under the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan, and we fight against these common issues together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you for pointing out that it's very important to look into how Roma are targeted and what the interconnected issues are, build solidarity among the different groups, but also enable them equal participation, and trying to link anti-Gypsyism with the other forms of inequalities that are existing, but then also calling up onto ensuring racial equality and mainstreaming of the policy, and ensure a coherence of the policy there. Last but not least is Isak Skenderi from the Voice of Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian from Kosovo. And lately many things are happening in Kosovo regarding anti-Gypsyism. We could see that the president of Kosovo, the prime minister of Kosovo, various ministers are taking part in events where this phenomena is being addressed. So please tell us about it, and what are the ways forward on the national level? Is it working? Are institutions open to understand the phenomena that our people are facing?
So the floor is yours, Isaac.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here and to present the experiences of Kosovo with regards to combating anti-Gypsyism. And the answers to all of the questions can be found in the presentation I have, which is also followed with a short PowerPoint slides. So let me just give me a second to figure out how this works. Maybe I will, I don't know.
He has the side button. He has to enable the side button.
Enable the side button.
I have?
Yeah.
No, up. It should be green.
Green.
I don't know. Ask me.
So, yes, here we are. Hopefully you can read something from it, and also I will complement with the presentation. So in principle, anti-Gypsyism is a complex phenomenon that produces and reproduces inequalities towards Roma and the rest of the society, and stigmatizing the identity of this group. And this has been emphasized several times so far throughout the presentation. The negative feelings and attitudes of other groups in society towards the Roma reinforces the stigmatization of their identity and contributes to their negative portrayal in policy making and in the everyday operations of institutions. One of the most common origins of anti-Gypsyism is the rise of the nation state and the nationalism as an ideology encompassing the nation-building processes. In Kosovo, anti-Gypsyism arose at the confrontation of the two nationalisms that led to the recent war that affected all the communities in Kosovo. Without a kind state to defend them and speak on their behalf, many Roma Ashkenazi Egyptians, they flew the war and were targeted to encounter other forms of anti-Gypsyism. Among contemporary forms of anti-Gypsyism, the experience of Kosovo Roma Ashkenazi Egyptians adds to the institutional practices which constitute manifestations of anti-Gypsyism, and unfortunately, what we can witness now in Ukraine, similar patterns and scenarios, and the lessons learned in Kosovo should be used to avoid these scenarios in this country. So, ethnic stereotypes and prejudice are present to a certain degree in everyday society. It is the role of education and institutions to make sure that these stereotypes and prejudice do not limit the exercise of rights in every human being or citizen. Whenever such a limitation of someone's right takes place, there should be a legal means to remedy the situation, compensate the victim, and punish the perpetrators. And we have heard some of the experience in the previous panel. The exclusion of Roma Ashkenazi Egyptians has multiplied discriminations in Kosovo, and it takes place in almost all fields of public life. The perceived vulnerability of Roma and the other two communities is usually framed in terms of poverty and risk of exclusion, but power relations and concerted displays of superiority from the rest of society are actually the key dimensions to be considered when analyzing anti-Gypsyism. The children from these communities are lacking any positive cultural affirmations and are induced by the idea that they cannot be proud of their ancestors, their past, and their contribution to society. Thus, they should not be proud individuals of their ethnic identity. How children are treated in the early years of their lives, including how they are treated in the education system, can impact negatively or positively on the rest of their lives. For many Roma Ashkenazi Egyptian children in Kosovo, It is during their passage through the education system that they unfortunately encounter and succumb to the pressures of anti-Gypsyism. For the most non-Roma Ashkenazi Egyptian children, school does not offer an adequate educational message to the ascendants of Roma Ashkenazi Egyptian people in Kosovo or in wider Europe. Thus, like their parents, they will rely on the media and hearsay the shape of their opinion. The situation which existed for Roma people in the camps of Mitrovica, for example, from 2000 until 2010, and I believe there is people among you who are more closely familiar to it, illustrates the extent of such health failures. The health of all Roma people living in the camps at that time, especially children and pregnant women, were at sustained and serious long-term risk from lead contamination. The time and effort required to generate any form of response from the government side showed a flagrant disregard for the health and well-being of the Roma people, especially the children and pregnant women. Isolation of Roma Ashkenazi Egyptian communities in so-called mahallas, lower access to quality education, limited access to kindergarten, separation of the children from their peers, unequal access to employment and healthcare are all manifestations of anti-Gypsyism in Kosovo, what we were able so far to identify. Many members of these communities do not enjoy the same status as other national minorities in Kosovo, unfortunately. Therefore, we must continue to explore the roots and manifestations of anti-Gypsyism, its negative impact on social inclusion, and identify possible solutions that should be incorporated into government policies and related procedures and large projects. And therefore, some of the way forward and what we have identified is that the anti-discrimination legislation should be implemented as a matter of urgency. A legal analysis assessment should be conducted to identify shortcomings in the implementation of anti-discrimination law, and concrete measures should be designed that could lead to a significant increase in legal cases. Roma needs to take responsibility for acknowledging and challenging and reporting discriminatory and exclusionary practices when they experience them. Processes can be put in place to support and facilitate people to be more active in this regard and to be less fearful of repercussion. That's our duty. The government and all public sector institutions should provide initial training and continuous professional development to the civil servants and anti-racism and anti-bias as a means to increase institutional performance and to create more professional body of civil servants accountable to those they serve. Roma civil society should also take action to improve contacts and connections with members of the press and media. And also, there should be trainings for journalists on anti-racism and discriminatory terminology. And I understand this is also one of the topics that will be discussed during the Roma Week, the importance of the media. But the way forward also means that we have to build a movement. We as a Roma have to build a network of active supporters, high-profile individuals who are visible in society and speak out in support of eradicating anti-Gypsyism. We have to develop a sustainable and impactful strategy for social media campaigns to build visibility, understanding, and recognition of anti-Gypsyism. We have to mobilize the media and engage journalists in order to amplify the actions of movement promoters. We have to continue networking. We have to increase opportunities and space for Roma and non-Roma to come together. We have to organize meetings with the communities. We have to organize panels of the citizens where municipalities and community members can come together. And I'm happy to see mayors from Western Balkan countries in this session who have been selected as the most Roma-friendly mayor and who have proved with their actions and activities that it can be done, that it's possible. So I wish to use the opportunity and congratulate them to the award that will the ceremony will take place tomorrow. We have to empower people through community activism and social action. And we have to do this in order to raise the awareness not only of the Roma, but also the non-Roma, about the importance of combating anti-Gypsyism in order to come to the situations when we have the recognition. I'm very sorry that the slide was lagging somehow with the rest of the presentation. This is some of the actions that we have took in Kosovo in order to raise awareness, increase the public dialogue about the anti-Gypsyism, and come to the situations where we have high-profile political leaders, such as also the prime ministers of the president, giving the strong messages about the necessity and the importance to combat anti-Gypsyism. It's a momentum that we have to grasp and use in order to, as Marta said in the beginning when we open, find ways how to implement what we set forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isak, especially reminding us that the ways forward also includes implementation of policies and the commitments made by governments, and that also we have an important role. It's not only knowing about our rights, but we should also fully enjoy them, but also take responsibility and report discriminations if it happens, but also the anti-bias training that you have an example of. I remember last year we worked with Ergo on it, and we developed a manual for public officials that they can use to train them so they understand about the Roma dimension and what Roma are facing with. I receive a message that we are kind of over time, so I will not delay this because we have a very interesting panel. Next is the Chachi pen, about what is the truth behind anti-Gypsyism. So this being said, I would just invite our speakers for the concluding remarks. We have the director of Ergo, Gabriela Hrabranova, Mr. Romeo Franz, member of the European Parliament of the Greens and European Free Alliance, and of course, Ms. Irena Mozova, the director from the Directorate for Equality and Union Citizenship from DG Justice and the European Commission.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello, it's me again, Gabriela Hrabanova from the Ergo Network for the closing remarks. We are a little bit over the time, so I would first want to thank you all the panelists and also all you here who are with us in the European Parliament, but also those who are watching us online. So greetings from Brussels. We have a very important political debate, and anti-Gypsyism, it's on the agenda. Yeah, and we have our distinguished guests that came for closing remarks. So first I would like to give a word to Romeo Franz. He's himself a Sinti Roma from Germany, but also Sinto Roma from Germany, and Sinto only.
Sinto only.
Sinto only.
Or a Romani man.
A Romani man. And it's said by Romani woman, which is me. But also he's a member of the European Parliament. He's coming from the group of Greens, European Free Alliance, and he's also behind this whole event, the whole Romani week. So he's the main coordinator and the main supporter of us in this year, in this term of the European Parliament. So please, Romeo, the floor is yours. And just to be a little bit cautious about the time, I would very appreciate.
I would only need 1 hour. Very short. Will be very short. Thank you for this very comprehensive discussion about the potentials of the EU Roma framework and the difficulties in translating the goals into actual change on the ground. Ambitions and goals have been written down on the EU level, and the EU funding programs provide possibilities of significant funding. We are at a moment of the political process in which the expectations vis-à-vis the EU member states are high. But the results remain limited so far. We face a challenge that progress depends on the willingness of the governments to actually change policies, formulate binding goals, and, also important, provide financial resources. This is something that we must observe closely. In this regard, I'm glad that a civil monitor is established that includes self-organizations from all member states to closely monitor the member states' implementation of the EU framework strategy. I'm also glad that the new German government decided to appoint a commissioner on anti-Gypsyism, Dr. Mehmet Daimagüler. I hope that his new position will allow to raise awareness for Romani inclusion and the racism that our people face in Germany. These measures have the potential to become examples for ways to improve the accountability of member states for the action and non-action towards Romani equality and inclusion. My hope remains that the non-binding character of the Romani framework will at a certain moment become a legal obligation. I am convinced that this is a necessary step in order to finally become more effective in the fight against anti-Gypsyism and in the protection of the citizens' rights of our people. Therefore, I fight for a Romani law in this House. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Romeo. You also have our support in fighting for this law. And I would like to give the floor to Irena Mozova. She's a director. She's coming from the Directorate of Equality and Union Citizenship from the DG Justice, European Commission. And Irena, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. Honorable member, dear Romeo, distinguished speakers and the participants, ladies and gentlemen, Paki Vale Roma. We are at the end of the discussions, and let me very warmly thank all the speakers for the very insightful contributions. I have been witnessing very sad testimonies, but also a lot of the commitments from your side. And what I'm taking home from these discussions is that we know about the scope, the nature, and the forms of the different manifestations of the anti-Gypsyism, and also we know about its consequences they have on the lives of the Roma, but also on the life of the European society as a whole. And let me say it clear, so we are living in the 21st century. But still, according to the latest FRA discrimination survey, so we have 80% of Roma which are living at the risk of poverty. Every third Roma lives in the housing without the tap water. 1 in 10 Roma lives in the housing without the electricity. And we have many Roma suffering from the hunger in their homes. And let me be very clear. Discrimination and anti-Gypsyism are simply incompatible with the fundamental values of the European Union. They are incompatible with the fundamental values which are enshrined in the European Treaty from 1959. And we have progressed since that. So we have a legal instruments. We have the Racial Equality Directive. We have a Council framework decision. So we can fight now against the hate speech and the hate crime, and we can also prohibit and persecute the direct and indirect discrimination that Roma are unfortunately still facing in their daily lives. And we have, as Roma mentioned, so we have the strategic framework with its three pillars approach. And for the first time ever, so we have a really very strong focus on the fight against discrimination and anti-Gypsyism, which goes unfortunately hand in hand with the social inclusion and the promotion of active participation of Roma. And it acknowledges very clearly that while not all Roma are socio-economically disadvantaged, yes, all the Roma can be targeted by prejudice, can be targeted by the racism, and they are targeted by the anti-Gypsyism and also discrimination. As Mr. Romeo said clearly, so member states are key. And that's why also it is so important that we have a new instrument in our hands since 2021, the Council recommendations, which is looking at the member states and invite them to fight anti-Gypsyism and discrimination, including harassment, stereotyping, hate speech, hate crime, and the violence against Roma, online but also offline. And member states themselves, they committed to implement measures and to analyze and acknowledge the existence of the anti-Gypsyism, to raise also the public awareness, and to build up the national anti-racism action plans to be adopted by the end of this year. Therefore, let me call from this place. Let me call from this place to the representatives of the member states and also all relevant national authorities to consider the fight against anti-Gypsyism to be their own fight, to be the integral part of the overall work tackling racism in all its possible forms. Let me also very shortly touch upon the situation on Roma in the context of the Russian aggression and invasion in Ukraine. Roma, as other millions of people, they are fleeing from this war, from these horrible atrocities of the past. And they are in the danger because they are even more vulnerable than the others. They are lacking documentation. Sometimes they have separated children, and they are facing the biased attitudes. And that's why we are calling also on all the member states hosting those refugees to accept them without any discrimination. We have seen that the recent report from the Fundamental Rights Agency is actually describing some issues, and we have to really make sure that the authorities are diligent, preventing any discrimination and the racist discriminatory to those Roma fleeing from Ukraine. Because Europe as a whole, including enlargement countries, has a long way to go to achieve the real equality for Roma. And that's why it is so important to have the public policies based on an inclusive, non-discriminatory perspective and cross-cutting way to fight anti-Roma racism, but also anti-Gypsyism. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Gabriela, for organizing this very important event. Thank you very much, Romeo, for your support to hold this Roma Week in the European Parliament. And yes, te avanzaste tai bahtale.
Thank you, Irena. Thank you, distinguished guests. So our overall objective was to facilitate the discussion on the existing challenges and modern anti-Gypsyism in the Western Balkan and Turkey and European Union. I think we managed this. I mean, we didn't engage you so much in the discussion as we wished because of the time pressure. But I think that we really have to kind of keep us engaged across the institutions. We are going to kick off and start the decade countering anti-Gypsyism, which we did by accepting the EU framework for the Roma inclusion, participation and equality until 2030. So let's keep this anti-Gypsyism on the agenda, but not only in the strategies, but in the action plan, implemented in the legislation, and let's keep us engaged And we have to also mobilize ourselves to actually make sure that this change is happening. And we heard a lot today what is happening across Europe. We also heard around about our friends in Ukraine and the refugees. So I have just a very short call for all of you. You will see this small document which actually is calling you to support and to buy a lunch for someone in Ukraine. So there is a €4 lunch which you can buy, or you can buy 10 lunches for €10. And this will be distributed by our member organization Chirikli across the Ukraine, in Odessa, Kiev, Kharkiv, everywhere where it's possible. So just if you find this, don't hesitate and support, because we really have to do the best for this. I would really like to thank the partners, Roma Active Albania, Central Council for German and Sinti in Germany, and our guests, our hosts. All of you, but also the only and the one translator, Gyula Vámosi, who is here. So thank you so much. And I think that's all. I think that we will take like 10 minutes break only. So if you, I also want to greet all the mayors. I didn't do it, so thank you so much. And so about 10 minutes break, and then we move to another event which is ahead of us. So thank you, everybody.